It is, yes, sir. But as you say, there is a wide disagreement with respect to what it means. What we mean is we want to provide the tools and resources to the private sector to protect their systems. So if we can anticipate or we are aware of a given threat, and as you know, we've gone to great lengths this year to work with the intel community to also include otherwise classified information with respect to malware, botnets, other types of infections. We want to give that to the private sector so that they can proactively defend themselves before they are in fact attacked.
Okay, second, do you believe that current law imposes any unnecessary constraints on the private sector's ability to deploy active defense?
I would say that I'd be happy to work with your staff. It's rather complicated, as you know. There's some limitations with respect to liability. There's other questions with respect to insurance. And we do need to continue to work with the private sector to understand if there's any barriers that would prevent them from taking measures to protect themselves and the American people.
Okay, turning to the department's counterterrorism efforts, a March 2017 report by the Inspectors General of DHS, the intelligence community, and DOJ identified a series of concerns that the report authors concluded, quote, have made the DHS intelligence enterprise less effective and valuable to the intelligence community than it could be, unquote. Can you provide an update regarding the department's implementation of the IG report's specific recommendations and any other changes the department has made in the way it shares counterterrorism information?
Yes. First of all, I'd just like to say I think that the Inspector General plays a vital role, especially at a department such as DHS with such a broad scope. So it's certainly my intent to continue to work with the IG's office and to track all of their recommendations and to make sure that we implement them. With respect to this particular report and the intelligence apparatus at DHS writ large, what we're looking to do is make our intel more requirement driven. In other words, what is it do the men and women on the front lines need? And then let's look at how to gather and work with our intel partners on collection to provide that information. We're well past a point where we can be responsive and defensive, if you will, after something happens. We need to be able to gather that information to prevent. So it's moving towards a operational-based intel posture that would be requirement-based on the threat.
Okay. Well, let me just say, for nearly 20 years, we've been talking about the dreamer population. We've been talking about border security for just as long. It's time we did something, and there's a lot of desire among my colleagues to find a path forward to make a deal, if you would. But to do that, we need to be realistic. To my Democratic friends, I say it's time to stop pushing for a clean Dream Act. As a matter of simple political reality, it's not going to happen. To my Republican friends, I say we're not going to get the sun, moon, and the stars, the best deal we can get, but we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So let's be realistic. And I say, well, my time is up, but I actually think that we can get this done. And I hope that you'll be helpful in doing so.
Yes, sir. It not only is my great hope, but I'd like to again reiterate, I'm happy to work with any member and every member who would like to work on this with the Department of Homeland Security. It's a very, very important issue.
Thank you.
Senator Leahy. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Welcome. I know we'll be seeing you here and again in the Appropriations Committee. You mentioned the report you just issued saying that 402 individuals were convicted of terrorism since 9/11 and that they were foreign born. Now, most of them were convicted during the Bush administration and the Obama administration, very few during this administration. How many of them, does your report say how many of them came from countries subject to the travel ban and how long each of them had been in this country?
I don't have that information in hand, sir, but as you say, you're right. It's over a 15-year period, that one particular
Will you get to me how many of them, by the numbers, how many of them were foreign-born and in a country subject to the travel ban, and what was the amount of time they'd been here?
Yes, to the extent that information is available, yes.
Well, it's all available. I mean, you got the number of the convictions. You certainly should have a number of where they were from and how long they'd been here.
Yes, sir. But oftentimes, as you know, what we might have is where they came from, because that would be what their visa would indicate. We don't
I
always.
understand
Okay. So yes, within the data we have, absolutely.
To gain the convictions, I was a prosecutor. They would have in the reports how long they'd been here and what they were doing. Now, last week in the Oval Office, President Trump reportedly said the most vulgar and racist things I've ever heard a president of either party utter. In fact, I've never heard any president, Republican or Democrat, utter anything even similar. Now he denies using the specific word. And there's been some, maybe he used a different word, maybe he didn't. Now, Madam Secretary, you were in the room. You're under oath. Did President Trump use this word or a substantially similar word to describe certain countries?
I did not hear that word used, no, sir.
That's not a question. Did he use anything similar to that describing certain countries?
The conversation was very impassioned. I don't dispute that the president was using tough language. Others in the room were also using tough language. If I could, the concept and the context, I believe, in which this came up was the concept that the president would like to move to a merit-based system. He would like to not and no longer look at quotas from countries.
Did he use what would be considered vulgar language referring to certain countries?
The president used tough language in general, as did other congressmen in the room. Yes, sir.
Yes, the others aren't. President, you imply the president was articulating support for a merit-based immigration system like those in Australia or Canada. But when he denigrated Haiti, El Salvador, and Africa, a country where we are trying to have some ability to match China and others in influence, he didn't say it's because we needed more PhD students or skilled workers. He said he wanted more people from Norway. Being from Norway is not a skill. And with the standard of living in Norway better than ours, you're not going to have too many people from there. What does he mean when he says he wants more immigrants from Norway?
I don't believe he said that specifically. What he was saying was he was using Norway as an example of a country that is, what he was specifically referring to is the prime minister telling him that the people of Norway work very hard. And so what he was referencing is, from a merit-based perspective, we'd like to have those with skills who can assimilate and contribute to the United States, moving away from country quotas and to an individual merit-based system.
Norway is a predominantly white country, isn't it?
I actually do not know that, sir, but I imagine that is the case.
Okay. Now, the Obama administration focused its limited enforcement resources, and everybody have to admit, enforcement, the ability for enforcement is limited. You can't hit every single thing.
That's correct.
The Obama administration focuses on those who pose public safety threats. President Trump has expanded those. Now he has those who could be charged with a crime or a priority. That means millions of undocumented immigrants are subject to removal. They are a priority for removal. One of the things I learned as a prosecutor, if everyone is a priority, nobody's a priority, because you can't do them all. In Texas, Border Patrol agents detained a 10-year-old girl with cerebral palsy on her way to a hospital for surgery. One hell of a threat she was. In Ohio, the father and sole caregiver of a 6-year-old paraplegic boy is facing deportation. Just yesterday in Michigan, a man brought to this country at the age of 10 was deported after living here for over 30 years, torn away from his wife and children who are U.S. citizens. He's never committed a crime, and he pays his taxes every year. Now, that's how we're using our limited enforcement resources. Is it to strike fear in the hearts of everybody, whether they've done something wrong or not, or they tell them they can be targeted any time. I'm sure that 10-year-old girl with cerebral palsy is scared.
Sir, first of all, I am not sure we would agree on the facts of that Texas case, but we're happy to meet with you.
Submit the facts.
I'm sorry?
Submit the facts.
She was
under
not
oath.
detained. We actually helped her and escorted her to the hospital and then turned her over to HHS. But to your larger question, what we focus on in terms of enforcement priorities are those who have committed crimes and those with final orders of removal. Our statistics show that that is, in fact, what we're doing. Last year, 92% of those that were arrested and taken into custody by ICE were criminals. So I understand that there will always be exceptions. There's a lot of misunderstandings in the press. I'd be happy to work with you at any time if there's a case of concern to make sure that we understand.
On that, we do ask questions of your department, and on occasion, we've gotten answers. Let's try to get answers to all of them. Now, you know, the president says he wants to build a big, beautiful wall, have Mexico pay for it. The president's promised Mexico to pay for it. Have we opened an account that Mexico can put the money in to pay for it? I'm sure the president wouldn't make that promise if he and not tell the truth. What arrangements do we have with Mexico to pay for it?
Sir, as the Secretary of Homeland Security, what I'm concerned about is getting the frontline operators.
Do you know whether we have arrangements with Mexico to pay for it?
I know that we have arrangements with Mexico to secure our border.
Do we have arrangements with them to pay for the wall as President Trump promised the American people they would do? That's an easy answer, yes or no.
I am not aware. I don't know what you mean by arrangement. We have a lot of agreements with them to increase border security.
Are any of them to pay for a wall?
How do you mean pay, sir? Do you mean through fees? Do you mean through, there's a variety of ways.
Well, usually when something's paid for, you pay for it with money.
I understand that, but I'm saying there are many ways to do that and collect that.
Wall? Are they paying for a wall?
My priority is to increase border security and to build that wall that will work. That's my priority, sir. That's what I'm focused on.
Well, let's then talk about that. CBP estimates that building a wall will result in taking land from 900 ranchers and other landowners in 2 Texas counties alone. That's just 2 counties. Now insert that letter, Chairman, if I might, in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
And what is your estimate of the number of eminent domain cases against ranchers and other American landowners that be required in order to build a wall?
Sir, the initial wall that we're building right now, as you know, for this year is replacement wall.
I'm talking about the wall.
I couldn't possibly give you how many people will decide in the future to have an issue with eminent domain.
Well, if you build a wall on the U.S. side of the border, you have to create a no man's land between the wall and the Rio Grande River. How many acres of land, of American land, do we have to cede to Mexico to do that?
What we'll have to do is look at the terrain, the traffic, the accessibility, and you're right, we have to tailor the solutions for each part of the border to make sure that we don't have to do anything that's unnecessary, whether that's additional land acquisition.
If we don't have an agreement with Mexico to pay for it, and if, as many say, a wall is last century's technology, with that $18 billion, how many more CBP agents could you hire, or TSA screeners to shorten lines at our airports, which have become ridiculous in some places? Or how many Coast Guard cutters could you build in order to rescue those at sea, interdict drugs, and protect our ports?
Sir, all I can tell you is that walls work. We have examples of that. We have documented data, and I don't know about anyone saying it's last generation's technology. 2006, as you know, we had a bipartisan agreement in the Secure Fence Act, which Senators Obama, Clinton, and Schumer all voted for. So I disagree that it's last generation's, last century's technology.
And parts of that wall was built. And there are places where you do it. We're talking about a wall the length of our country.
We're not. The president has made that clear.
I'm not going to play back a lot of his campaign speeches to you about a wall a great big beautiful wall the length of our southern border paid for by Mexico. I've heard a lot of promises in my decades here. I'm waiting to see this one fulfilled. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the extra time.
I think since you were at the same meeting I was at Tuesday, the president said 700 miles additional wall.
722, yes, sir.
Okay.
Initial down payment.
Senator Cornett.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, for your willingness to take on what is probably one of the most difficult jobs in the United States government, and that is the leadership of the Department of Homeland Security, but it's also one of the most important jobs in the U.S. government. I want to continue the line of questioning from my friend from Vermont about the border security. It's no surprise to you that I come from a state that has 1,200 miles of common border with Mexico. And what we're talking about is what measures are going to be put into place to provide that border security, which my constituents all want. They want security.
Yes, sir.
And so I have been struck by your use of the phrase wall system, and just want to explore with you a little bit what you mean by that. One of the people that I've taken advice from is Rio Grande Valley Border Sector Chief Manny Padilla, who I believe you were with recently, who has told me that in his vast experience with the Border Patrol, that border security is composed of three elements. He said infrastructure is important. You can call it a secure fence, as we did in 2006. You can call it a wall, as the president does from time to time. But it includes not only that infrastructure, but also technology and, of course, the Border Patrol agents to be able to respond to sensors when they go off, or radar and the like. Is that what you mean when you talk about a wall system, some configuration of those three components, infrastructure, technology, and personnel?
Yes, sir. The president has asked us, as you know, to look at operational control of the border. The wall system, therefore, is infrastructure, as you described, technology, personnel, and I would add it's also closing those loopholes so that we can promptly remove those we interdict. But in general, we look at four main mission sets. So we look at impedance and denial, which is partly granted through that infrastructure. We look at domain awareness, which are the sensors, the cameras, et cetera. We look at access and mobility so that the Border Patrol agents can respond to threats. And then we look at mission readiness, which is having that personnel that we need to be able to do the job.
Because of the impact to local communities and in Texas and elsewhere along the border, do you have any objection to consulting with local stakeholders as they try to come up with perhaps innovative solutions to deal with the border security challenge?
Oh, it's an open invitation. The only way that we will be able to protect the border is by working with both state and local officials, as well as those landowners and private sector. So absolutely.
I was at the Rio Grande, in the Rio Grande Valley on Friday and Saturday and Sunday, hunting the ever elusive wild Texas quail. And I did happen to go over to a wildlife sanctuary on Friday, which is a unique tourist attraction and one that's located within several hundred yards of the Texas border. What I'm told there is that the smugglers, the transnational criminal organizations you alluded to before, do see that as a vulnerability. And so obviously we need to meet that challenge, and I know that Chief Padilla and others are working hard to do that. But we also need to be sensitive to the concerns I think that the local community has about a huge economic element there, and something that we entertain a lot of folks from up north. They call affectionately snowbirds down there. When it's cold up north, they come down south, and they're great. It's great for them. It's great for the economy. It's great for jobs. So that would be one example of a need to work collaboratively with the local community and local stakeholders, as well as state and local officials, to come up with the right solution. I remember a few years back in Hidalgo, Texas, Hidalgo County, Texas, using that same local stakeholder input approach, we were able to come up with a win-win proposition. You're familiar with a levee wall.
Yes, sir.
There was obviously a need to improve the levee system down there and protect
property values and to make flood insurance affordable. But in consultation, I remember J.D. Salinas, who was the county judge in Hidalgo, Texas. They put a bond election on the ballot and came up with a dual-use system, which actually provided that levee improvement, but also provided a wall in critical areas that the Border Patrols that they said they needed in order to slow down the flow of illegal immigration and drug trafficking and the like. So that's just one example of what I consider a win-win proposition and where one size does not fit all. So I appreciate your willingness to work with all of us to come up with those kind of win-win situations where possible. Chief Padilla told me that the majority of people who are coming across the border and who are detained in the Rio Grande Valley sector are from Central America. I can't remember the exact percentage, but it's a high percentage, as you know. And what these traffickers are doing is exploiting, as you point out, a vulnerability in our system. We passed the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act years ago in order to protect children from human trafficking. It's a highly worthy cause.
Agree.
But the traffickers have now figured out that since children who come from Central America are treated differently than other people who enter the country illegally, they have found a way to exploit it. And I believe you mentioned that 90% of them who are notified of a future court hearing on their claim for asylum, for example, never show up. And that's a real glitch. But I know there's been some attention paid, not enough attention paid in my view, to the threat of criminal gangs that exploit this vulnerability as well. I was told by Chief Padilla again that they have MS-13 gang members as young as 12 years old, and of course from 12 to 17 you'd still qualify as a minor. And let me ask, if Border Patrol identifies by the tattoos or other signs on somebody under 18 that they are likely a member of a criminal gang, are they permitted to detain them, or are they required to treat them the same way they would every other minor child and place them with a sponsor ultimately, and only to have them never show back up for their court hearing in the future? Are criminal gang members who happen to be minors treated any differently?
Unfortunately, no. We have to treat them the same. We do if we have that information provided to HHS, when, of course, they have them once we turn them over to HHS. But no, sir, it is a problem. We need to look at removability in general to make sure that we can address this gang problem. We see gangs all the way up to New York recruiting illegal immigrants and children to come across the border for the purposes of joining MS-13.
I know when we talk about unaccompanied children, people think about very young children of tender age. They don't think about a 17-year-old member of a criminal gang like MS-13, which is exploiting this very same vulnerability. I have every confidence that you and the Trump administration is going to do what you say you're going to do when it comes to border security, and I believe it's our responsibility as members of Congress to provide you the resources and tools and to make the appropriate changes in the law so that you can do what needs to be done. I know there have been requirements for border assessments in the past, but do you have any objection to Congress, perhaps as part of this negotiated border security part of the DACA fix, so-called, mandating that the department come up with a plan that would provide for 100% situational awareness and operational control of the border?
No, sir, I don't. I would encourage, if you haven't had the opportunity to look at the Border Security Investment Plan that we recently provided, there's some detail in there. But yes, on domain awareness, which is one of those 4 missions I mentioned, absolutely.
Well, I think it would be important to put that in the law because, of course, when administrations change, different administrations have different priorities in terms of border security and the like. And I'd like to make sure that the focus of this administration remains part of the congressional mandate in the law. And so would look forward to working with you on that. I know there's been some discussion of the DACA population, and certainly I, together with my colleagues on a bipartisan basis, want to find a solution for these young adults who came here as minor children and through no fault of their own find themselves in a dead end. I do know that there was a court decision which created some confusion the other day, and it strikes me as wildly wrong to say that President Obama can create a program and that President Trump cannot end it, because certainly the executive authority would seem to be the same. But can you tell us about the plans of the administration to appeal that, or otherwise how you plan to address it?
Yes, sir. Of course, as the Department of Homeland Security, we defer to the Department of Justice, who, as you know, are looking at a variety of ways in which to respond to that. What I can tell you is DHS is complying with the court order. We have begun to accept renewals for DACA. We are treating the program as pre-September of last year. So if you are a current DACA recipient, you can currently reapply while we're pending this court action.
Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I ask questions of the Secretary, I'd like to ask the indulgence of the committee to introduce two guests that I've brought here today. Alejandra Duran Arreola is a second-year student at Loyola University School of Medicine in Chicago. Alejandra, would you please stand? Alejandra grew up in Savannah, Georgia. In addition to medical school, she volunteers at a clinic educating uninsured patients about disease prevention. Her dream is to become an OB/GYN working in underserved communities. She is protected by DACA. Thank you very much, Alejandra, for being here. Her future is in doubt. Without the protection of DACA, she does not have a legal permission to work in America. You cannot become a doctor without a residency. A residency is a job. If DACA is eliminated and her protection is eliminated and her right to work is eliminated, then her future as a doctor is in doubt. John Magdaleno, would you please stand? John came from Venezuela at the age of 9. In high school, he was commander of the Air Honor Society and junior ROTC. He graduated from Georgia Tech, one of the best engineering schools in America, with a degree in chemical and biomolecular engineering with the highest honors. He now works as a chemical engineer. His dream is to serve in the United States military. John, thanks for being here. That's what this debate is all about. That's what DACA is all about. There's been a lot of talk about terrorists and threats to America. We stand as one, not as Democrats or Republican, but as one, in saying let's keep America safe. But for goodness sakes, not at the expense of young people like the two I just introduced. That is what this conversation and debate is all about. Madam Secretary, I hope you remember me. We were together at 2 meetings last week. I would like to ask you about one of those meetings. It occurred about noon on January the 11th. You were a few minutes late, I know, and asked forgiveness, but you were called at the last minute to come and attend. Some things were said at that meeting which I believe we have to address today. People across the United States and around the world want to know what this president believes should be our priorities when it comes to immigration. I'm going to ask you, as best you can, to recall what you heard the president say when it came to those priorities. What do you remember the president saying about immigration from African countries to the United States?
What I heard him saying was that he'd like to move away from a country-based quota system to a merit-based system. So it shouldn't matter where you're from. It should matter what you can contribute to the United States.
How did he characterize those countries in Africa?
I don't specifically remember a categorization of countries in Africa. I think what he was saying is, as far as best I could tell, and as you know, there were about a dozen people in the room. There were a lot of cross conversations. There was a lot of rough talk by a lot of people in the room. But what I understood him to be saying is, let's move away from the countries and let's look at the individual and make sure that those we bring here can contribute to our society.
Do you remember the president saying expressly, I want more Europeans? Why can't we have more immigrants from Norway?
I do remember him asking about the concept of underrepresented countries as a fix. This was in the conversation about removing the diversity lottery and how we could reallocate that. And I do remember him asking If we do that and we then assign those to countries that are unrepresented, aren't we just continuing non-merit-based immigration? So from that perspective, I think he did ask, would that cover European countries, or by its nature, would that mean that we are further establishing immigration to purposefully exclude Europeans?
What did the president say about immigrants from Norway?
I heard him repeating what he had learned in a meeting before, that they are industrious, that they are a hardworking country. They don't have much crime there. They don't have much debt. I think in general, I just heard him giving compliments to Norway.
You said on Fox News that the president used strong language. What was that strong language?
Let's see. Strong language, there was... apologies, I don't remember a specific word. What I was struck with, frankly, as I'm sure you were as well, was just the general profanity that was used in the room by almost everyone.
Did you hear me use profanity?
No, sir. Neither did I.
Did you hear Senator Graham use profanity?
I did hear tough language from Senator Graham. Yes, sir.
What did he say?
He used tough language. He was impassioned. I think he was feeling very strongly about the issue, as was everyone in the room. And to underscore a point, I think he was using some strong language.
Do you recall that the strong language he used repeated exactly what the president had said prior to that?
I remember specific cuss words being used by a variety of members.
I'm not going to ask you to say those words here, but I will just say for the record, Senator Graham spoke up in a way that I respect very much, countering what the president had said about countries in Africa, reminding the president that his family did not come to America with great skills or wealth, but they came here as most families do, looking for a chance to prove themselves and make this a better nation. And in defense of Senator Graham, his strong words repeated exactly the words used by the president, which you cannot remember. Let me ask you another question.
If I just could, sir, I do want to say that I greatly appreciate not only Senator Graham's leadership, but yours as well. I know you're both very passionate about this. As you know, afterwards, I approached you and asked that I'm happy to come talk to you anytime to try to work on this deal. I do think that Senator Graham very impassionately described what he believes America is about and what we should move towards. Yes, I agree with that.
Do you support a path to citizenship for DACA recipients and those who were in the DREAM Act?
I think we have to find a permanent solution. Yes, sir.
I hate that phrase, permanent solution. Do you support a path to citizenship?
I believe that is part of the discussion, and to make sure that we don't continue temporary populations that continue to exist, we should talk about that. I'm not here to get in front of the president or any final decisions on that particular issue, but yes, I'm happy to discuss it.
Do you recall the president saying that he wanted $20 billion now and he would build this wall within 1 year?
I do remember him saying that he was concerned that given the appropriation cycle, that any deal that we made now would be limited to this year's appropriation. I remember him asking, is there a way to authorize the full down payment of the wall such that we could have assurances that we could in fact build it?
So let's take a look at what your department has done when it comes to building walls. As of December the 6th, 2017, less than 1% of the $341 million appropriated for 40 miles of replacement funding had been expended. Actual construction has yet to begin on money appropriated in the last fiscal year. So is the president realistic when he says he wants $20 billion so he can build the wall in 1 year?
I think the president is encouraging us to go as quickly as we can. As you know, it's a very complicated issue building the wall for a whole variety of reasons. What we're doing right now is we are testing and evaluating those prototypes, and we'll continue to determine not only the design, but what's best per some of the other senators' comments for any particular part of the border, because it will be different. We need a full toolkit.
Madam Secretary, the president made it clear in that meeting that one of the conditions for his assent or agreement to protect DACA was $20 billion so he could build this wall in 1 year. The fate of John and Alejandra lies in the balance here. The president is insisting on something that is physically, legally impossible as a condition for him to give them a chance to be here in the United States legally. Now, you've seen, because you commented on it, Fox News, the proposal, which Senator Graham and I, as well as 4 other senators, have made on a bipartisan basis, and you've rejected it. You said at one point, I believe, that, let me see if I quote here, there's nothing in there that would prevent us from getting here again. Are you aware of the fact that included in this proposal is the entire request of the administration for border security in this fiscal year? $1.6 billion for walls and barriers and fences, and another $1 billion for technology, exactly what you asked for. If you don't believe this is going to solve the problem, which is what you said on Fox News, why did the administration request it in the first place?
Well, sir, that's not all we requested, as you know. We also requested to close the loopholes that serve as the pull factors that continue to exacerbate the problem. I cannot apprehend if I cannot remove. That's not border security.
Let me add, the first meeting we had last week, we agreed, and the president agreed, there would be two phases to this conversation. The first, immediately to deal with the DACA challenge and the three other elements the president
including
raised.
border security, sir.
Including border security, every penny that you ask for. And then the president said phase two goes into comprehensive immigration reform, many of the issues which you described as must-haves. We understand that. To put the entire burden of immigration reform on the shoulders of these DACA recipients is fundamentally unfair, not practical, and jeopardizes their future and their lives. What we're trying to do is an honest, bipartisan approach to deal with the first phase of this, and you have rejected it.
I thank you for your passion. I hope you understand mine. I cannot agree to a deal that does not give the tools and resources to the men and women of Department of Homeland Security to do the job you've asked them to do.
We gave you every penny you asked for.
Sir, it's not the pennies.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
closing the loopholes.
Then can we cut back on some of this money because we could sure use it?
We need the wall, too. The wall works, as you know. It's part of border security.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, thank you for being here. I'm glad I missed that meeting, the latter part of the week, but I really enjoyed and thought was productive the meeting we had. You were in the room with a couple of dozen of us, and I'm deeply disappointed that we can't get people to think reasonably about this and bridge the gap. I don't necessarily think it's that wide now if we just sit down and lower the temperatures. What's the distance between the Pacific Ocean and the Gulf Coast, the total miles of border?
DHS looked at over 2,000 miles for purposes of assessing where we need a wall.
Okay, but geographically, it's even a bit more than that.
It is, yes,
right?
sir.
Somewhere around 2,300. Mm-hmm. When your full plan for the border security is implemented, how much of that will be in a wall versus fences or other structures?
So there's three different infrastructures we talk about. There's a primary wall, there's a secondary wall, and then in some cases there's infrastructure in the form of access roads or the mobility piece of the mission. But the current down payment request is 722 miles. So that's replacement and secondary and new wall.
Okay. When this is fully built out, would you ever envision, I think the president said in the meeting twice in front of the press and then once or twice after the press left the room, that he's dispensed with the notion of this large monolithic one-size-fits-all wall, right?
Yes, sir.
So I don't know why people would go back to campaign discussions. You know, both parties tend to have a little bit of flourish when they're on the stump. But it seems to me the president's came here, he's listened to the people who are down at the border and has determined that the department has a good idea that involves people, technology, and infrastructure. So it would be fair to say in the face of the direct comments and the data now from the department, it would just be disingenuous to suggest that anybody is proposing a large monolithic wall?
Yes, sir, that would be disingenuous.
Yeah. Now let's talk about the pull factor, because I think if you learn nothing else from the amnesty of 1986, you learn if you don't address the pull factor that all you've done with amnesty is invite a lot more people in waiting for the next amnesty. What's been your experience since we've started talking about DACA in terms of border crossings over the past few months?
Well, in general, we have to reduce those pull factors, as you say, and some of those pull factors are of the loopholes. Again, I just cannot
Once they
stress
get
it
here,
enough.
it's hard for them to go.
Yes, sir. And even those that we interdict, apprehend, it takes over 2 years to get them through the system when they have a removable offense to begin with.
So what's our batting average then on actually removing once somebody gets into the system? It's got to be fairly low.
It's fairly low, yes, sir. I can get you an exact figure, but...
In border security, do you all, or this may be over injustice, take a look at how dangerous the communities are as a result of Senator Cornyn mentioned gang members. Is it true, or is there data to suggest that many of the dangerous people who cross the border, the majority aren't? but the dangerous ones find themselves in the very Hispanic communities after they cross the border, making them less safe than, say, my community?
Yes, sir. And in fact, I think when I went to the Rio Grande Valley, which was the area that Senator Cornyn was reviewing, we were talking about the RIP crews, if you will. So those are those that are part of a TCO that are raiding a house where they believe weapons or drugs are stashed, where they might have pre-positioned them.
I've been to one.
But on both sides of the border. So without that wall, the RIP crews go back and forth, back and forth. It's a danger to the Mexican side. It's a danger to our side as well.
We were in Laredo. Senator Cornyn led a CODEL down to the border, and we were in various places. Laredo was one that stuck in my mind because a couple of weeks earlier, Border Patrol agents who were in a helicopter were shot at. They actually had the door with the hole in it in the briefing room. Would you characterize, I mean, a lot of people think the Rio Grande is wide and deep. It's actually relatively narrow and shallow, so much so that they've got low draft or no draft boats to get to many places because you can walk across it. So you're 40, 50 yards away. How would you characterize Nuevo Laredo in terms of safety and security?
I wouldn't be able to tell you specifically Laredo compared to others, but what I can tell you is very unfortunately, the occurrences of attacks and violence against my agents has increased 63%. I'm working very closely with the Department of Justice and the Attorney General. We will prosecute. This has got to stop. I will not continue to put my folks in danger.
It's very dangerous and it's very porous, and crossings happen frequently. When you go down the Rio Grande, you see the spotters out there. They know when Border Patrol's coming, they retreat, and then they come back into it. It's very dangerous. It seems odd to me that someone would not support providing you all the tools you need to keep our Border Patrol safe, but keep those communities safe. There are bad people crossing the border probably daily, and until we get serious about border security, we're going to continue to make this country less safe and the Hispanic communities less safe.
So the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen there testifying in front of the Senate committee regarding the wall, the construction of the wall that candidate Donald Trump promised. Also, you heard a lot of the senators trying to get her to characterize some of the rough language that the president is alleged to have used in a meeting on this topic earlier in the week. We'll continue to keep our eye on these hearings as they progress and be back with more on Happening Now in just a moment. Fox News alert now on the countdown to stop a government shutdown and how a deal to protect the Dreamers is also involved.
That's right. President Trump back in Washington just days before a key deadline on Capitol Hill where lawmakers need to hammer out a spending bill to avoid a government shutdown. And Democrats want a deal on DACA as part of it. But the president says one Democrat is undermining the trust on immigration, tweeting Senator Dickey Durbin totally misrepresented what was said at the DACA meeting. Deals can't get made when there was no trust. Durbin blew DACA and is hurting our military. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live with the very latest. Hi, John.
Julie, good morning to you. The White House is trying to cut two deals this week, one on DACA protections and trying to get some border security provisions, an end to chain migration, and an end to the visa lottery program at the same time that they're trying to cut a deal with the Democrats to keep the government open as well. The White House confident that can get both, though it says it doesn't believe it will get a DACA deal this week. The president certainly is standing firm on his demands for a DACA deal, tweeting out this morning, quote, "We must have security at our very dangerous southern border, and we must have a great wall to help protect us and to help stop the massive inflow of drugs pouring into our country. And the Democrats want to shut down the government over amnesty for all and border security. The biggest loser will be our rapidly rebuilding military at a time we need it more than ever. We need a merit-based system of immigration, and we need it now. No more dangerous lottery." Democrats are accusing the president of not negotiating in good faith, saying that they have gone, quote, somewhat in his direction on the border security immigration issues, and tried to use the president's alleged S-hole remarks, which have been characterized by many of his opponents as racist, as leverage in the negotiations. Listen to what Senator Chuck Schumer said on the Colbert Show last night.
You want to just begin that long road back to proving you're not a racist, you're not bigoted. Support the bipartisan compromise that 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats have put on the floor. Everyone gave, and get the Dreamers safety here in America.
And after an appearance on Fox and Friends this morning, we put the question of what Senator Schumer said to Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Listen to her response.
That is an outrageous claim. And frankly, I think if the critics of the president were who he said he was, why did NBC give him a show for a decade on TV? Why did Chuck Schumer and all of his colleagues come and beg Donald Trump for money? If they are who they want to try to portray him as, why did they want to be, with him for years and years in various activities, whether it was events and fundraisers?
So where do we really stand on all of this? Again, the White House believes that it will get a deal on DACA. They're just saying it likely won't happen this week because there's still way too much ground to cover, particularly in light of the negotiations over the spending bill as well. And on that spending bill, Julie, they think that they will get a continuing resolution in time to hit the deadline on the 19th to keep the government running. They don't think that the Democrats will hold together to shut down the government over an issue like DACA.